Porque tu búsqueda de mejores oportunidades y de un mejor futuro para ti y tu familia son lo que te motiva a seguir adelante cada día. Hemos decidido unir esfuerzos, años de estudios, de conocimiento y de experiencia para darte el soporte que tus sueños merecen. GNL Immigration y Palacio Immigration, Gabriela NAJAR y Claudia Palacio juntas en Statera Immigration, un norte para tu futuro.
Well, welcome to everyone who is here today at noon, lunchtime. This is a new format, and I hope you enjoy it. It is something that we decided to do as a lot of people cannot join us in the evenings. So Leanne, Gavi, and I decided to bring you at lunchtime some kind of information about immigration. And today we are here, the three of us. Sharing with you information about the PR card and the PR obligations, your permanent residency. It is time to travel overseas to visit family and friends, but sometimes that is complicated. That could bring several problems. So, Leanne, Gabby, how are you?
Good. We're cold out here in Alberta, but we're good. I am.
Okay, Alberta. Edmonton.
Hello, Claudia. Hello, Leanne. Yes, it's extremely cold, but it's something that happens every year, but it doesn't matter what happens, we don't get used to it. So it's like, oh, it's colder. So, but we love this country. We love the province. So here we are.
Yeah, it's beautiful and
Winter
sunny.
time. What happened? It's Canada.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And Claudia, as you mentioned, we decided to do something different this time. And we are doing this program or this
Live.
Exactly, this live in English, as there is a lot of our clients who don't speak Spanish. So, and lots of our clients who speak Spanish, they do speak English. So we decided to do this so that way Leanne can participate and our clients know about how it's important to comply with all the residency requirements in order to keep the permanent residency status.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Leanne wrote an article that will be published in our blog in Rumbo Canada, and it is exactly regarding this topic, how to comply with the permanent residency application. So, Leanne, tell us what is all of this about, because it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, well, I thought about writing it after having a client who had to travel out of Canada, has been a PR for a very long time, but did not become a citizen, never applied for it. And they left Canada and had to deal with a family situation and ended up being out of Canada for longer than they anticipated. And their PR card expired while they were out of the country. And, now things have resolved. They would like to come back to Canada, but their PR card has expired. And I assume that people know. So if you are out of the country and your PR card expires, you have nothing to re-enter Canada with. So you need your PR travel document. And in applying for that, the officer is going to review your residency obligations. So I assume, but maybe a lot of people need a reminder if they've been a PR for a long time, and maybe people haven't traveled outside of Canada, right? So they don't pay attention. But part of the obligation of being a permanent resident is that you are in Canada for at least 2 years out of every 5. So that's 730 days. And, this client obviously had overstayed outside of the country and are in a position now where they are at risk of, losing their PR due to not meeting that residency obligation. So the article kind of is going to discuss that situation and the residency obligation, which I think, like I said, if you've been in Canada for a long time, it's something that, maybe people forget about, that this is an obligation that they need to meet, and they need to be mindful of it so that they're not caught in a situation outside of Canada and
And
not
it
having
happens.
medication.
It happens so often, Leanne. We always see clients that travel because a family member is sick and it's nothing serious, but all of a sudden things just go, they just derail, and life happens, and they have to remain for longer, and things get complicated, and all of a sudden they see themselves outside Canada, and what do I do now?
Mhm.
We hear a lot about in social media. So just go to the border, enter through the states because you can cross the border, and it sounds so simple. Well, I take a plane to the states because I have a visa, and then I will show up at the Ontario border in Niagara Falls or in Buffalo or maybe in Alberta, and a nice CBSA officer will take over your case. So I'm applying for the travel documents. You need to prove exactly the same, that you comply with the 730 days, 2 years in the last 5. And if you have, well, it's not a problem. A travel document and you can board a plane, and it is exactly the same as having a PR card in your hands.
Mhm.
But when you have not 730, but 720, there the nightmare begins. So what will you do, Gabby? What will you do, Leanne, in a situation like that?
Well, Claudia, before I answer that questions, I just want to clarify that there is 2 ways that you can enter if you don't have your PR card, or as a permanent resident. One is with your PR card, and the other one is with your confirmation of permanent residency at the land border. And as Claudia mentioned, the land border officer has the obligation to review your permanent residency requirements. There are people who have been lucky, and the officer doesn't say anything, and they can enter Canada. And then as soon as they enter Canada, they apply for the PR card, and then the nightmare begins again, because they are not eligible to apply for the PR card at that time, and then they can get a 40 report. That's the name, the 40 report that the officer exactly.
What is
It's for
what is a 40 report? Hold on,
it is
because we are not talking with immigration consultants here. We are talking to people who doesn't know
okay.
about immigration.
I'm going to make it simple. The officer can write you a report saying that you are inadmissible to Canada because you are not a permanent residency. So reality is that a lot of people live outside Canada with their spouse. I have a client that she lives in Mexico, and she lives in Mexico almost 7 months a year, and they come to Canada only for a couple of months to settle up their financial issues and everything. So even though she is a permanent resident because she's living with her husband and she can comply with the requirements living with her husband overseas, every time that she wants to apply for a travel document or re-enter Canada, she has a lot of problems. So she contacted me yesterday asking me if she can renounce her permanent resident status because she doesn't want to have all these problems all over again. So she applied for her PR card last year. We applied for her PR card last year, and it took her 7 months for an officer to decide that she needed an interview. And we had all the proof that she was living with her spouse. So it's not only that you are out of Canada on your own, but it's only if you are outside of Canada with your spouse, you are in a nightmare too, because it's a lot
The
of
spouse that is a Canadian citizen.
Exactly. And it has to be a Canadian citizen. Some people think that because they live with their children, they are eligible, but no, it has to be your spouse who's a Canadian citizen. And it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't have a PR card, it is a nightmare to re-enter Canada. It is. And reality is that clients apply for the PR card after they come to Canada without being complying with that residency requirement. And you said, Claudia, if somebody has 720 days and they do apply for the PR card, they're going to be refused for that or for the travel document. And they have to prove that they have humanitarian and compassionate reasons to qualify for that exemption. And so that way they can travel to Canada. And those humanitarian and compassionate reasons are not very easy to prove. Because some people said, oh, well, I wanted to finish my career in my country of origin because it was cheaper for me, it was better, I already started there. That's not an agency. That is not considerations for complying with the requirements. So there are others that Leanne mentioned in her article who are definitely the reasons why you can comply with these permanent residency requirements or apply for the humanitarian and compassionate grounds, but you have to prove them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's difficult to prove. And it's funny because I think my first thought is always, well, how could you let your PR card lapse? Well, I'm sitting here, I'm a family of 6. I've got 4 kids. We all have passports that expire at different times. Trying to keep everybody's travel documents valid and whatever is a full-time job. So it's very understandable that people end up, they travel, like you said, Claudia, life happens. You don't know when you're going to get a call from a family member far away, or you win a cruise to the Bahamas and you jump on the plane and go, so it's common, more common than we think, that people allow these documents to lapse. And important to remember too, that you can only apply for your PR card while you're in Canada. You can't be overseas and apply to replace your PR card.
And you cannot apply to your travel document while you are in Canada. You need to be outside Canada.
Exactly. So, and
Yeah.
and those are the situations. And just to clarify, a PR card is not a document that you can prove that you're a permanent resident. It's a travel document. You just mentioned before. It's just a travel document, so that way when you go to the airline, you can prove to the person who's gonna get you into the plane that you're a permanent residency and you don't need a visa to enter Canada. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, and this happens very often, and people don't think that, they think that they need a PR card to prove that they're permanent residents in Canada, and they keep those PR cards in their wallets, in their purses. And if they lose them, then it's another nightmare. So that document has to always be with your passport. So it has to be attached to your passport, basically. Don't take it in your wallet, because if somebody steals your wallet or you lose it, then you lose your PR card. And in an emergency to travel quickly, then you are going to need a travel document to come back to Canada. So that is a recommendation that I always give to all our new permanent residents, is always keep your PR card with your passport. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that they lose the confirmation of permanent residency because they don't think that that document is that important. And I always tell them that confirmation of permanent residency is like your birth certificate in Canada. Basically, that document is going to be the one who confirms the date that you became a permanent resident. And that document, you have to keep it like it's gold, because to get a new one is impossible. It's not possible. And the other thing that you can get is basically a letter saying that, yes, you became a permanent resident on this day. But I think that confirmation of permanent residency has to be kept in a safe place.
Interestingly enough, Gabi, I had a situation with a client a while ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago. He lost the confirmation. At that time, it was the record of landing. It's the co-op PR today, right? And it wasn't an important document because it's a white paper. It's a legal size document printed in a computer. It's nothing fancy like the work permit, or no, it's just a white paper printed in a computer, not even with a red Canadian flag. So he thought, like you said, that it's just a paper, a letter I received from immigration, and he threw it away. When he applied for his pension, that was the paper that Service Canada asked for. And it was crazy. At that time, the verification of a status, which is the letter that you were saying that you will get saying, well, you were landed in Canada this time, it was taking like 7 months. So his pension was delayed forever and ever because he lost that record of landing or confirmation of PR. So it is a document that we all should keep, first in a safe place, and second, digitalize it and keep it in a special file where you keep all your important documents.
Lately, with the virtual landings, it's easier because they have it scanned already for them. But before, you're right, I have that long paper too. And when I apply for my citizenship, they require that document as well. So they are not reporting it now, but they may require it. But you're right that the most important part of this document is when you apply for your pension, because you're gonna show it. So I have it in a safe place, and it's gonna stay there because mine, and I'm keeping the one for my whole family because I know that if I give it to them, they're gonna lose it. But reality is that It is
Such a confidence in your family.
they will lose it. So I'll keep it in a safe place. I have done everything for them. I'll keep it in a safe place. But
Yeah.
reality is that people don't realize, like what Liana mentioned, is that the time that is going to count for the permanent residency status in Canada is the moment that they arrive at the border. And I think that that's what you were trying to say in your article, that if you come to Canada on January 1st, 2023, so then the officer is going to go back to the 5 years after and the moment that you enter Canada to verify that your status in Canada is a permanent resident. So it doesn't matter that before those 5 years you were only 1 year and a half, because those 5 years are counting. Then you may lose your permanent residency.
Or if you were 40. Leanne, what was the story of your clients? Of course, you cannot reveal their names or anything, but tell us about them, because this could clarify a little bit for our audience what could happen.
Yeah. So as far as humanitarian compassionate, or
time in Canada before leaving and everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, this client was a person that had been in Canada, I believe, since they were 8 years old. So, and you know, they're grown and have kids now. And so, like I said, I think almost 40 years in Canada as a PR, has never lapsed residency obligation, nothing. But like I said, had a family emergency. One of their kids was ill, had to leave. And ended up overstaying, ended up being out of the country almost 3 years. You know, COVID happened, borders closed, they were unable to come home. And so the PR card had expired. So they have to apply for a PRTD. I mean, luckily for them, in a way, their situation does involve, you know, situation that was totally out of their control. Loved one was very ill. They had to be there to provide care for them. This was their child. The child was, you know, mentally and physically disabled. So it was as far as humanitarian and compassionate considerations go, this could be a really strong case. However, the onus is always on the person, the applicant, to prove all of this. So when that client goes to apply for the PRTD, it's their responsibility to give all of this information to
a travel document. Let me interrupt you.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm gonna tell you something. Yes, I just realized it. I had a consultation yesterday with a client who was telling me that the information that we give in these lives is amazing, that he has learned a lot. But he also said, but you know what? It took me a while to understand what you were saying, because you speak about LMIAs and TLCs and PRTDs, and what is all of that?
So plain simple, we need to talk in language without terms, so that way they can understand. So, and the travel document for permanent residents is the document who allows permanent residents to travel to Canada without a permanent resident card.
Right. Yes. So sorry.
So, Leanne, I have a question for you, and this is very important. You mentioned COVID and COVID closures. Have you heard of any exemptions from the government for people who couldn't come back to Canada because of COVID?
Not personally. I mean, this would be my first situation that, you know, where the PR card had expired and they weren't. So it'll be interesting to see how the officer puts this out. But I don't think that there's going to be any leeway.
And you know why? And you know why? Because they have the opportunity to come back.
Exactly.
So humanitarian flights.
Exactly. There were lots of humanitarian flights for Canadian residents, permanent residents and Canadian citizens, and many people decided not to take those planes and come back to Canada. They gave them a lot of facilities. They helped them financially. When they couldn't do the humanitarian flights, they gave them credits to pay for those plane tickets. So they did. The government did everything in their hands to support people who were out of Canada during the COVID restrictions to come back, and some people decided not to. That's why there is no leeway, as you were mentioning, for people who stay there because of COVID. So there is not a compassion. That this cannot be used as compassion and
No.
humanitarian considerations. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I wanted to clarify that, because a lot of people tells me, well, I couldn't travel because of COVID.
Right.
And I said,
COVID.
no, you could travel. You decided not to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, this client will be needing to prove that there was, yes, they could have traveled. However, their situation, for whatever reason, they're going to have to prove that that was important enough that they were not able to come home. And, the other issue is, this client or any client that's gone over a long period of time, let's say to care for an ailing family member or whatever the situation is, can other arrangements be made? Can you come back to Canada to add to your residency, arrange for somebody else to care for that family member while they're gone, so that you are, keeping and adding to your time? This client, for whatever reason, wasn't able to do that, but that will again be on them to prove to the officer, these were the reasons why, this is why I should be, allowed to apply for this document to allow me back into Canada and my status.
Exactly. And then in case that they refuse the travel document for the permanent residency, they can appeal the decision. And Claudia, so a case about a Brazilian guy who had an ill grandmother in Brazil, and he couldn't travel to Canada, and he was appealing his decision. So, Claudia, how many times the officer asked why you didn't find somebody else's to make arrangements?
We can count how many times, Gabby, and also the fact that it is not, on humanitarian reasons, doesn't exist merely because you have an ill family member. That's the point. A lot of people tend to believe that, well, I couldn't return because my mom was ill, because my mom passed away. Well, when was the first moment that you could travel after the situation was solved? Why did it take 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or a year to travel back to Canada? So humanitarian grounds, or better, the officers have a lot of discretion assessing humanitarian grounds. There is not a checklist for humanitarian applications. For the federal skilled workers, we know we need to prove that you have a CLB7, English language, in the 7 levels, that you have at least 1 year of post-secondary education, that you have at least 1 year of work experience. Almost every single program has a checklist, but the humanitarian cases doesn't. So you need to prove that, well, there is a compelling situation that is out of your control. Well, having an ill mother or an ill father or a grandmother that passed away, I have seen officers saying, I'm so sorry. But you also had brothers and sisters, siblings back home. They could have taken care of your ill parent. Or, you know what? You could have traveled sooner. Or, you know what? You didn't kept your ties with Canada. You weren't looking for a job. You closed your accounts. So the decision is no. And I truly believe that in immigration you can win almost anything if you are willing to go through the whole levels of appeals, even to the Supreme Court of Canada. But I always tell the clients, it is a very long time, a very costly process. If you can avoid all that hassle, just do it. Leanne was saying in her article that it is important to keep a record of trips or of your travels overseas. And that is absolutely true. Check your PR card, check your passport. You cannot imagine how many people travel overseas without, how do you say, an expired passport? Because we can travel to our own countries with an expired passport, and then what? You need to apply for one, and it's taking forever. So it's a matter of keeping the records organized. But as Leanne said, when you have 6 family members and every single one has different expiry dates in all their documents, it's kind of difficult.
And you mentioned something, Claudia, that is very important, to keep track of all those trips with the exact dates. Because sometimes they are like, oh, well, I think it was on the 5th of February. No, it was on the 10th. And then they write whatever they think it was. And then they have a letter from the officer. We need to see all your passports, travel tickets, all the stamps, because your entry was completely different. And some people, some people think that when you enter Canada, or when you leave Canada, there is no records of exit. There is records of exit. Since 2020 is when they started taking those records of exits. Leanne, do you remember?
I don't remember, but I agree. I think, I come into this problem even when people are applying for their permanent residency, and they can't remember all of their travels, and they say, well, surely they don't need to know all of I don't remember the exact days. And I said, this is a big deal. It's a big deal to obtain permanent resident status in Canada. It's a big deal. And if you really want it, you need to show that you're going to keep record of these things. You have kept record of these things. In a previous roundtable, we talked about the cardinal sin of lying to an officer. And, this is a big deal. And once you get your permanent residency, you do not want to risk that over something that's preventable. I think that's the key. Preventable. We've talked about keeping these things in a safe place. I have 2 adopted kids. Their birth certificates, their former passports, all of their citizenship certificates, all of that is in a safe. If you are an immigrant and you have immigration papers, your COPR, all these things, invest in a safe. Keep these things, keep your PR card, your passports, keep your travel records. It's not a good reason to risk losing your permanent residency over.
Thank you for the advice. I don't have a safe.
Go to Costco and get a safe. That's what I have.
I have one in my closet. So yeah, you're right. What happens if I have fire in my house?
Exactly. And like you said, these documents are not replaceable. Or if they are, they're very difficult. So keep them in a safe place. Keep records of all of your travels. Keep an eye on the expiration date of your PR card. It's important. Like you said, you don't know when somebody's going to become ill. You don't know when you're going to have an opportunity to travel. And with processing times right now for cards, for passports, it's hard when a client comes and says, my mom is ill, I need to travel now. Well, maybe their TRV has expired, their PR card has expired. What do you say? It's unfortunate, but the officer doesn't care. The officer just doesn't care.
They do their job.
True.
They're doing their job.
There is something else. Once you lose your permanent residency status, it is not a matter of, I'm going to send an application and they will give it back to me. No, you have to qualify. So that means that you have to start the process all over again. That means that with the point system that we have right now, the express entry will be kind of crazy. If you were sponsored by your parents, and you are now over 22, well, good luck, because you will have to apply as a regular person to the express entry or with a job offer, a nomination. So it is not that simple. Losing the permanent residency status is losing a huge privilege, because it is not a right, it's a privilege.
And I feel really bad when clients tell me, can you help me to apply for renounce my status as a permanent resident because I cannot be in Canada for that time. It really hurts my heart. And I said, just try to apply for a travel document, come to Canada and stay for the months that you're missing. Obviously, if they leave for a year and then they're going to, like you said, it's counting 5 years behind. So it's going to be 5 years, 3 months instead of 3 months that they could have stayed. But yeah, I totally agree with Claudia. This is a privilege. And I will, when they ask me, I always tell them thinking twice, because it's going to be very difficult to get it back.
And
and before we go, I'm sorry, Leanne, but before we go, because this is planned for only half an hour, we have 2 questions here that I would like to answer. Well, not me, you. And David Martin says, hi, can you remind me if there is a criminal record check for study permit or open work permit? I wonder if my express entry PR application is the first time Canada will look into my records.
Well, that's a very good question. It's not required, just for some countries it's required, but they usually check your background. So especially when you have a record in the United States, it will show up in a work permit or study permit application, but they won't check your background from your country of citizenship, let's say from Colombia or from Mexico. Sometimes they do. And sometimes when you're applying for a work permit, they check if you're telling the truth regarding that you have never been arrested, but they don't ask you for a criminal record, but they do check, because obviously that information they have access, the visa officers. So do you think something different, Claudia?
Well, no, I completely agree with you, but there is one thing. It is different if I already have my study permit and I get caught driving with alcohol or with drugs, right? But that is because it happens already while I have my status. That will have a problem, or it will create a problem for PR if I apply for it. But when I am applying for my study permit or my open work permit, the application form asks, have you committed a crime or have you been charged? If I say no, but happens that yes, I was charged at some point, that is misrepresentation. So it is not that it could or not create a problem, is you have to declare it. If you have a record, a criminal record or a medical record, you have to declare it in your application. And depending on the record, well, you have a space there to clarify what happened. I can easily say, well, I was charged, but my charges were dismissed. So maybe immigration doesn't ask for anything, but you already declare it. Or they could say, you know what, send me your criminal record.
And it also depends on the country, right? Like the Philippines, often you do have to provide a record check, but that's a country requirement, not a Canadian requirement for that type of permit. So depends.
Well, and 32 minutes, the idea of this new segment, Tales from the North, is because Gabriela and Lian are in the North, actually. And the North Pole is the northern city or major city in Canada, Edmonton, Alberta. And well, we hope that we can see you again here every Wednesday at lunchtime discussing another situation with immigration that we hope that can help you to clear the pathway to Canadian permanent residency or citizenship. And well, this will be a segment in English. First, because Lian is learning Spanish, but we want to practice our English. And second, because it will be an opportunity for the ones who speak English, but it is not their first language, to practice it. And for the ones who doesn't speak Spanish, well, to also learn from a little bit about immigration. So thank you very much for all of you who accompanied us today. Please share this information with your friends and family members. And maybe if you could help us sharing it in the groups that you belong to, it would be fantastic. That way we can reach more people. Lian, Gabby.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Lian. It was a pleasure to talk to you guys about this. As you said, it's a very important time of the year, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, see you all next.
Porque tu búsqueda de mejores oportunidades y de un mejor futuro para ti y tu familia son lo que te motiva a seguir adelante cada día. Hemos decidido unir esfuerzos, años de estudios, de conocimiento y de experiencia para darte el soporte que tus sueños merecen. GNL Immigration y Palacio Immigration, Gabriela NAJAR y Claudia Palacio juntas en Statera Immigration, un norte